my wife Catherine died, my life collapsed. Overnight, it was just me and our 3-year-old daughter, Elena. She was my little princess, the last light in a world that had gone dark. But grief doesn't stop bills from coming due. I still had a business to run, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't be in 2 places at once. Eventually, I accepted I'd need help during the day and started looking for a babysitter. I was meticulous. Interviews, background checks, references, I did all of it. That's how I found James. Young, polite, with solid experience working with kids. When he met Elena, she warmed up to him immediately. Watching her giggle in his arms eased some of my anxiety. I thought I'd made a good choice. About 2 months later, on a night that felt like any other, I stayed late at work. Deadlines were piling up. It happened sometimes. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was close to midnight. Something felt wrong the second I saw the house. James's car wasn't in the driveway. For a moment, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he'd taken Elena somewhere. But why would he take a 3-year-old out that late? My stomach knotted. The house was completely dark. No glow from the windows, no sound from inside. I rushed to the door, unlocked it, and stepped in. James, Elena, silence. I tore through every room, upstairs, downstairs, the bathroom, the closets. I sprinted into the backyard, calling their names. Nothing. The house was empty. Elena's toys lay scattered across the living room floor as if she'd just been playing, but there was no sign of her. I called James. His phone went straight to voicemail. That's when the panic truly hit. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, I could barely form words. My daughter, she's gone. The babysitter, he's gone too. The dispatcher stayed calm, told me officers were on their way. Within minutes, squad cars pulled up. They asked everything. When I'd left for work, when I'd last seen James, whether he'd said anything unusual. I answered as best I could, my mind a blur of fear and disbelief. "We'll find them," one officer said. "We'll put out an Amber Alert for your daughter." That promise gave me the smallest sliver of hope, but the night dragged on, and every hour without answers twisted that hope into dread. Where was my little girl? What was happening to her? 3 excruciating days later, the police called. "We've got James," they said, "but we don't have your daughter." I drove to the station immediately. They had James in an interview room. He wouldn't look at me. He seemed smaller somehow, jittery, nervous. "Where is she?" I demanded. "What did you do to my daughter?" An officer stepped between us. "He claims he sold her." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at James, rage and disbelief thundering through me. "You sold her. She's a child." "What kind of monster are you?" He mumbled something, but I couldn't hear it over the roar in my ears. The officer continued, his voice clinical. According to him, he sold Elena for $10,000 to someone living in a remote cabin in the forests of Alaska. "Who is this person?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How do we get her back?" They told me they had a lead on the cabin and were coordinating with local authorities in Alaska. But it would take time, too much time. Every minute felt like another piece of me was being carved away. I barely slept. I didn't eat. All I could see when I closed my eyes was Elena's face, imagining her terrified and alone. 2 more days crawled by before the phone rang again. They'd found the cabin. It was deep in the woods, nearly an hour from the closest town. An elderly woman lived there by herself. When officers went inside, they found signs of a child, tiny clothes, a toy bear almost identical to one Elena owned. My heart pounded as they described the basement. A locked, windowless room, and inside my daughter. I flew to Alaska as soon as I could. Seeing Elena again was the most emotional moment of my life. She was frightened and confused, but physically unharmed. I wrapped my arms around her and promised her I would never let her go again. The woman who'd bought her was arrested on the spot. She claimed she had purchased Elena to raise as her own, as if that somehow excused what she'd done. Her cabin was filled with disturbing things: old dolls, locks of hair sealed in jars, photographs of children. Thinking about what might have happened if the police had been too late still makes my blood run cold. Elena rarely talks about those days in the cabin, and I don't force her to. She's slowly adjusting, but the bright spark in her eyes isn't as strong as it once was. I've put her in therapy, hoping it will help her heal. Me, I can't stop blaming myself. I hired James. I trusted him. If I'd been more careful, if I hadn't worked so late that night, maybe none of it would have happened. But all I can do now is be there for her and make sure she knows she's safe. I sold our house soon after. The empty rooms, the memory of that night, it was too much. Elena and I moved to a new town, far from where it all happened. Every night I check her bedroom twice, sometimes 3 times, just to be sure she's still there. James is in prison. The woman is locked away too. Knowing that helps, but it doesn't erase the fear. Thanksgiving used to feel like home to me. The smell of roasted turkey, Sam's ridiculous jokes, my family crowded around the table. It was the one holiday I truly looked forward to. That changed in 2019, the year Sam died in a car accident. He was only 14. The memory of him lying in the hospital bed, the machines beeping slower and slower, still stalks my dreams. By 2021, Thanksgiving had become hollow. My parents and I went through the motions, cooking, setting the table, pretending. That year, we invited my Uncle Joe and Aunt Linda to join us, trying to fill the emptiness. The house, tucked near the woods, always felt cozy yet strangely isolated, like the silence outside could stretch on forever. The evening unfolded in a strained imitation of normal. Too much food, a bit too much beer, and small talk that carefully sidestepped Sam's name. It was as if everyone was trying to erase him, and that hurt more than the memories themselves. By the time we went to bed, the quiet in the house was deep and heavy. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had never come easily after Sam died, especially not on Thanksgiving. My room was just down the hall from where his had been. Sometimes I caught myself glancing at his closed door, half expecting to hear him on the other side. The first knock was so soft I wasn't sure I'd heard it. 3 quick taps. I held my breath. Then came another set, louder this time, more deliberate. 3 sharp raps at the front door. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. Someone was out there. My phone was on the nightstand, but I didn't reach for it. Something about the knocks pinned me in place. It felt like if I moved, whoever it was would suddenly know exactly where I was. I strained to hear movement from the rest of the house. Nothing. But they had to be hearing it too. How could they not? The knocking continued. Always 3, not frantic, not desperate, just steady, patient. I lay there rigid, my heart pounding so loudly it almost drowned the sound out. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I waited a long time before letting myself breathe again. Minutes slid by. At some point, I must have drifted into an uneasy sleep, because the next thing I remember is sunlight bleeding through the curtains. When I went downstairs, my parents and Uncle Joe were already near the front door. Aunt Linda sat alone at the kitchen table, her hands locked around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. My dad spoke first. "Did you hear that knocking last night?" I nodded. "Yeah, around 3. Exactly 3, he said. My mom looked pale, her eyes darting between us. "No one went to check," Uncle Joe said flatly. "Whoever it was, if it was anyone, they're gone now. There's nothing out there." But he was wrong. When I opened the front door, I nearly tripped over it. A single white sneaker, damp with frost. It took me a few seconds to understand why it looked so familiar. It was Sam's, his favorite pair, the ones he'd been wearing the day of the accident. I recognized the scuff on the side from when he tried skateboarding, the faded lettering on the heel. "How is this here?" I whispered. My mom clapped a hand over her mouth and staggered backward, shaking her head in disbelief. My dad crouched down but wouldn't touch the shoe. "We need to check the cameras," he said quietly. We pulled up the security footage and fast-forwarded to 3 a.m. There was the porch, lit by the weak bulb over the door. And then Sam stepped into view. He walked in from the direction of the woods. He looked exactly as he had on the day he died. Same jeans, same hoodie, same white sneakers. The camera footage was grainy, his face pale but unmistakable. He approached the door and raised his hand. On the video, his knuckles rapped against the wood in perfect time with the knocking we'd all heard. I felt the blood drain from my body. For a while he just stood there, knocking in that same steady rhythm. Then something changed. His head snapped toward the tree line, like he'd heard or seen something. His expression twisted into sheer terror. Without warning, he turned and bolted back into the darkness of the woods. The camera showed nothing chasing him, but he ran as if something was right behind him. One of his shoes slipped off and landed on the porch. He didn't stop to pick it up. He vanished into the shadows. The porch remained empty for the rest of the night. No one spoke after the footage ended. My dad quietly closed the laptop. My mom retreated to her bedroom. Uncle Joe muttered something about needing firewood and disappeared for almost an hour. The shoe stayed on the porch all day. None of us could bring ourselves to throw it away or even touch it. By nightfall, my dad finally picked it up and placed it in a box in the attic, saying nothing. We never talked about that night again, not directly. Sometimes I catch my parents glancing at the attic door, like they're afraid the box might not stay closed. Every Thanksgiving since, I find myself awake at 3 a.m., staring up at the ceiling, listening. I haven't heard the knocking again. Before I continue with the next story, if you're here for the first time, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the bell icon so you don't miss upcoming scary stories. We depend on your support. Share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. My name is George, and I'm a police officer with the Shenandoah County Emergency Communications Center in Strasburg, Virginia. Law enforcement wasn't my dream. I graduated college wanting to be an actor, spent years auditioning for TV shows and movies, hoping for my big break. It never came. Eventually, reality won, and I needed a steady paycheck. That's how I ended up in this line of work. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. Most shifts are uneventful. Writing tickets, breaking up minor arguments, occasionally making an arrest. Usually things wind down without major trouble. But one night last December, I encountered something I'll never stop carrying with me. It was close to midnight when dispatch patched through a 911 call. A woman at the Rada by Wyndham Hotel was reportedly acting erratically and damaging property. I was assigned to respond. Calls like that aren't rare, especially around the holidays when stress and substance abuse spike, but I had no idea how far this one would go. The hotel parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. Under the harsh lights, I saw her, a barefoot woman clutching some object I couldn't clearly make out. Her movements were jerky, her whole posture radiating distress. I approached slowly, hands visible. I told her she was safe, asked her to come talk to me. She flicked her eyes toward me, wild and unfocused. "Are you going to take me to jail?" she blurted. Before I could answer, she lunged. I instinctively stepped back and tried to grab her arm, but she slipped away and bolted. "Stop!" I shouted, giving chase. She didn't even look back. I drew my taser and followed her around the side of the building. She vanished behind a dumpster, and for a moment I lost sight of her. My heart thudded as I scanned the shadows. Then she darted out again. I chased her, but I was already losing breath. I'm not in peak shape, and it was catching up to me. By the time I made it back toward my patrol car, she was there too, this time coming straight at me, arms flailing. "Get back," I yelled. "I don't want to hurt you," she kept advancing. I fired the taser. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. Whether it malfunctioned or the probes didn't connect, I don't know, but it failed when I needed it most. Frustration and fear surged together. She lunged, grabbed my radio mic, and we both went down hard on the asphalt. She scrambled up faster than I did. Her pants slipped, exposing her underwear. The whole scene felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. She clung to my radio and came at me again, wrapping the cord around my neck. It tightened quickly. I gasped, clawing for air as panic flared white hot. I fumbled for my baton and swung at her leg, desperate to break free. She wrenched the baton from my hand and cracked it against my head. Pain exploded in my skull. We separated for a split second. That was all I had. I pulled my gun. My hands shook as I aimed at her chest. "Stop," I shouted, my voice breaking. "I don't want to shoot you." She didn't stop. Her face was twisted with fury and desperation as she came toward me again. I stepped back. Then I pulled the trigger. 4 shots thundered through the cold night. Her body jerked with the impacts. She collapsed. At first she didn't move, then she twitched slightly before going still. I kept yelling at her to stay down, but there was no response. Chest heaving, I grabbed my radio, miraculously still working, and called for backup. I could feel tears pressing behind my eyes as the reality of what I'd done sank in. Why'd she make me do that? I muttered under my breath again and again. I'd never seen myself as a violent person. I joined the force to help people, not to kill them. But in that instant, it had been her life or mine. Officer David arrived first. He rushed to her side and started CPR, working tirelessly for more than 6 minutes until paramedics took over. I stood off to the side, numb, watching him try to pull her back from the edge I'd pushed her over. They loaded her into the ambulance and sped away. Hours later, we got the call. She hadn't survived. Her name was Melissa Tompkins. She was 40 years old, homeless, struggling with severe mental illness, and high on methamphetamine that night. The days that followed blurred into interviews, investigations, and paperwork. Every second of that encounter was dissected. Eventually, I was cleared. My actions were ruled justified. The verdict didn't bring me peace. The nightmares came anyway. I'm still on the job. Since that night, nothing anywhere near that chaotic has happened on my shifts. I show up, do my work, go home. But whenever I clip my badge to my belt, I remember Melissa and the split-second choices this job sometimes demands. Vacations are supposed to be relaxing. That's what my wife Melody and I told ourselves when we finally booked a week in Italy. We'd been saving for months, picturing cobblestone alleys, warm Mediterranean air, plates of pasta bigger than our faces. The trip was everything we wanted. Coming home was what unsettled us. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A few books were out of order on the shelf. A mug we'd bought in Rome had migrated from the kitchen counter to the dining table. I joked that maybe the house had gotten bored without us and decided to rearrange itself. Melody laughed, but there was no humor in her eyes. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe we'd just forgotten where we put things. Maybe the books had shifted. Still, a thin sense of wrongness clung to the house, like a bad smell you couldn't quite locate. A few days later, I was working a night shift. My office was only 20 minutes from home, and it was a slow evening. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. Melody. "Hey, everything okay?" I answered. All I heard was her breathing, fast and shallow, like she was trying not to cry. "Melody, are you there?" I think someone's in the house," she whispered. My heart plummeted. "What? Stay on the line," the call cut off. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys, sprinted to the car, and tore down the streets. The drive felt endless and too short at the same time. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was off. I was sure we'd left it on. The house was dark and silent. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. "Melody," my voice echoed in the quiet. No answer. I moved quickly through the rooms, flicking on lights as I went. The living room was empty, so was the kitchen, the dining room. Then I saw her. Melody lay on the hallway floor, motionless. Blood dripped from a deep cut on her forehead. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single image. "Melody," I dropped to my knees beside her, gently shaking her shoulder. Her eyelids fluttered and she let out a weak groan. Relief crashed through me as her eyes opened. "What happened?" I asked, helping her sit up. She touched her forehead and stared at the blood on her fingers. "I was walking to the kitchen," she said, voice unsteady. "I heard footsteps behind me. I thought it was you. Before I could turn around, something hit me. My blood ran cold." "Did you see who it was?" She shook her head. "No. I didn't even have time to look." Once I was sure she was stable, I called the police. They arrived fast. 2 officers searched the house while another took our statements. "No sign of forced entry," one of them said eventually. "Are you sure someone was here?" Anger flared, but I swallowed it. "My wife didn't do this to herself," I said tightly. "Whoever it was must have had a key or knew another way in." The officer jotted notes. "We'll do a full sweep. In the meantime, you might want to stay somewhere else for a few days." That night we checked into a nearby hotel. Neither of us slept much. Whoever had been in our house had disappeared without a trace. The police suggested changing the locks and installing a security system, which we did, but the sense of violation lingered. Over the next weeks, every creak of the floorboards and tap of the pipes made us jump. Melody stopped staying home alone when I worked late. She spent those nights at her sister's. I couldn't blame her. Then one evening, while I was cleaning the guest bedroom, I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. Inside, shoved into the far corner, was a baseball bat. We didn't own a baseball bat. I stared at it, my hand starting to tremble. Was this what had been used to hit Melody? Had the intruder hidden it there afterward? Or worse, had someone been living in our house without us realizing? I called the police again. They took the bat for testing, promising to check for fingerprints. If they ever found any, no one told me. Months have passed. We've upgraded the locks, added cameras, and tried to reclaim some sense of normal. But no matter what we do, that feeling never fully leaves. The sense that somewhere, someone is still watching. In September 2022, I was living in Onalaska, Wisconsin, a sophomore in high school. That was the month I almost died. I'd met Austin at my summer job. He was 17, and he used to go to my school before he got expelled for plagiarism. Because I didn't have my license yet, he offered to drive me to and from work every day. At the time, it seemed like a favor. It was obvious he had a crush on me. He hugged me every day, lingering a bit too long. I pretended not to notice, acting like I was oblivious. I didn't feel the same way, and I thought ignoring it would keep things simple. A couple of weeks into the new school year, I was still shaking off the summer. One night, after a party thrown by a kid from school, Austin drove me home. When he pulled up in front of my house, I grabbed my bag and reached for the door handle. "Hey," he said hesitantly, "do you want to go out with me?" I laughed it off and told him I just wanted to be friends. "Right," he said, frowning. We waved goodbye and I went inside. I kicked off my shoes, changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth, ready to crash. Right as I was about to crawl into bed, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend. I unlocked my phone, skimmed the text, and felt my stomach twist into a knot. It was a long paragraph explaining that Austin had been secretly taking pictures of me as I slept, in my own bed, through my bedroom window. I sometimes left my shades open because no streetlights or moonlight ever shone directly through that window. I thought it didn't matter. Attached to the message were photos of me asleep, vulnerable, exposed. My friend had them because Austin had bragged to her in a text, sending her screenshots of a photo album on his phone labeled "The Love of My Life." I felt like ice water had been poured through my veins. His rides, his hugs, the way he looked at me, it all snapped into brutal focus. I texted him in all caps, telling him never to contact me again. He replied, apologizing and trying to play the victim. It only made me angrier. I told him to delete my number and blocked him. By then, I was too wired to sleep. I took melatonin and Benadryl, hoping to knock myself out. Eventually, it worked, but not for long. I don't know how much time had passed when the sound of shattering glass ripped me out of sleep. I barely had time to react. Austin was standing in my room. Before I could see what was in his hand, I felt it, white-hot pain as a knife sliced across my face. I screamed, crying out without even meaning to. 5 seconds later, I heard my dad's voice shouting from the hallway. "What the hell is going on?" Austin bolted, diving back through the broken window. My dad burst into my room and froze when he saw me. I'll never forget the look on his face, a twisted mix of terror, grief, and fury. He rushed over, hugged me, and kept asking if I was okay, what had happened. I told him the truth. I wasn't okay, I didn't feel safe, and Austin had just climbed through my window and stabbed me with a knife. My dad's shock hardened instantly into anger. He ran out of the house, trying to chase Austin down, but he was gone. I called the police and told them everything, my voice shaking. They said they'd be there as soon as possible. They arrived about 10 minutes later, along with paramedics. By then I was dizzy, my face slick with blood. My dad gave me some water and wrapped a towel around me. I managed to tell the officers my side of the story before they loaded me into the ambulance. While I was taken to the hospital, they went looking for Austin. I stayed overnight in the hospital. My stab wounds were cleaned and stitched, and the next day they sent me home. It took the police a while, but they eventually found him. Later, I learned that at the hospital he'd said he knew he was going to prison for a long time, that he didn't know why he'd done it, and that he loved me. He was charged with 2 felony counts: attempted first-degree intentional homicide and rampant burglary. His cash bond was set at $50,000. About a year later, he was found guilty of the first charge. The second was dismissed but read-in. In the end, Austin was sentenced to 16 years in Wisconsin State Prison and 4 years of extended supervision. Justice was served, technically, but I still flinch around men, wondering what they're really thinking, what they're capable of. I know it sounds paranoid, but the PTSD is real. I feel nothing but pity for Austin now, and I hope he rots in hell when he dies. When my father remarried, I decided to come home for Thanksgiving to meet my new stepmother and her 2 sons properly. I hadn't spent much time with them, but I wanted to give it a chance. It was only a 90-minute drive. I arrived mid-morning. The house looked exactly the same. My dad had offered to sell it and buy something bigger for the new family, but his new wife had insisted they keep it. Later, I understood why. She liked having the space to herself. She didn't seem interested in my sister or me being part of their lives. The moment I walked in, the air felt cold. My stepmom greeted me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "What can I do to help?" I asked, trying to sound genuine. "I don't need any help," she replied curtly. I spent the morning awkwardly watching TV and making forced small talk with her sons. The younger one, only 13, seemed fine, quiet but polite. The older one, 18, unsettled me. There was a hardness to him. He stared too long, smirking occasionally as if he knew a joke no one else was in on. Around noon, my stepmom called her eldest to carve the turkey. My dad stepped in. "I'll do it," he said, taking the knife. He cut into the bird, then paused. "It's not done." My stepmom's expression darkened. "This oven must be broken," she snapped. My dad shrugged and slid the turkey back into the oven. The tension in the room grew heavy and stagnant. When we finally sat down to eat, the meal was strange. The turkey was undercooked. The dumplings were dry and dense. Most of the sides were barely edible. My stepmom sat at the head of the table, watching us with an unreadable look. When I asked what was for dessert, she let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "We don't need it," she said flatly. As I left that day, her parting words stuck with me. "Next time, call before you come." Months passed. My dad grew more distant. Our phone calls became shorter, his voice weaker and more uncertain with each conversation. When my sister called me, worried about his health, I decided to visit again. This time, the house felt different the moment I stepped onto the porch. Darker, heavier. My stepmom opened the door, smiling too widely. "Dad's not feeling well," she said, blocking the entrance. "I'd like to see him," I insisted. She hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside. My father was in his armchair in the living room, slumped forward. His skin was pale, and he looked like he'd lost a significant amount of weight. "Dad, what's going on?" I asked, sitting beside him. "Just tired," he murmured. "Have you seen a doctor?" "He doesn't need that," my stepmom cut in sharply from the doorway. "I'm taking care of him." Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. Determined not to argue in front of him, I offered to make tea and went into the kitchen. As I searched for tea bags, a dark glass bottle caught my eye on the counter. The label was handwritten, restorative syrup. The liquid inside was thick and murky. When I opened the bottle slightly and sniffed, it smelled bitter and faintly chemical. "What's this?" I called out, holding it up. My stepmom appeared instantly. Her smile vanished, her eyes narrowing. "That's for your father," she said quickly, crossing the room to take it from me. Her voice sounded calm, but her hands trembled. "It's to help him recover." "What's in it?" I asked. "Vitamins," she snapped. "It's none of your business." That night I lay awake, replaying that moment over and over. Something was terribly wrong. Before dawn, I slipped out of bed and crept back to the kitchen. The bottle was gone. Panic fluttered in my chest. I rifled through the cabinets until I found it shoved behind a row of cereal boxes. This time I unscrewed the cap and dipped a spoon into the syrup. The taste was vile, bitter, burning, with an acrid aftertaste that lingered on my tongue. Every instinct I had screamed at me to trust my gut. I snapped a photo of the label with my phone and put the bottle back where I'd found it. Later that morning, I sat by my father's chair. "Dad, what is that syrup she's been giving you?" I asked gently. He frowned slightly. "She says it's for my health," he said, "to help me get stronger. Do you feel any better?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. Worse." Before I could say more, my stepmom appeared in the doorway again, suspicion written on her face. "What are you two talking about?" she asked sharply. I stood up. "I think Dad needs to see a doctor." Her expression turned icy. "I've been taking care of him just fine." "No," I said, my fear finally overriding my politeness. "You haven't. Something is wrong, and I'm not leaving until he gets real help." For a moment, I thought she might physically lash out. Instead, she smiled. A slow, cold smile that made my skin crawl. "Suit yourself," she said softly, then turned and walked away. I slept in the living room that night, refusing to leave my father alone. The next morning, I took him to a doctor. When they analyzed the restorative syrup, the results were worse than I'd imagined. It contained substances that were actively harming him, ingredients that, taken over time, could have poisoned him. Armed with that proof, I confronted my stepmom. The sweetness evaporated. She screamed at me, calling me ungrateful, accusing me of trying to destroy her life. I didn't care. My only priority was my father. With my sister's help, we moved him out of the house. She fought us every step of the way, but in the end, we got him out. Slowly, he began to recover, physically and emotionally. He never talked much about what she'd done, but the relief in his eyes after the divorce said enough. My stepmother disappeared from our lives, fading into whatever shadows she'd come from. Traveling for work had become routine for me, but this trip from London to New York was different. It was the first time I'd traded a hotel for a cheap Airbnb. Money was tight. I found a listing for a small room in a shared apartment in Queens. It looked clean enough. The reviews were mixed, not glowing, not terrible, but nothing leapt out as dangerous. When I arrived, the building was old but solid, with cracked steps, graffiti on the walls, and a faint, musty smell in the hallways. My room was tiny, just a bed, a desk, and a closet, but it felt cozy. There was a shared kitchen and bathroom down the hall. That first evening, as I was unpacking, someone knocked on my door. A man in his early 40s stood there, tall and thin, with slightly messy hair and a big, eager smile. "Hey there, I'm Tom," he said. "I live next door. If you need anything, just knock. I've been here a few years. I know the area pretty well." I thanked him and introduced myself. He seemed friendly, maybe too friendly. But coming from London, where strangers don't usually chat you up in hallways, I chalked it up to cultural difference. Over the next few days, Tom was everywhere. Whenever I stepped out of my room, he appeared, lurking in the corridor, hovering in the kitchen, ready to talk. He recommended restaurants, warned me about bad blocks, suggested tourist spots. At first, having someone to talk to was nice. Traveling alone can be isolating. But his curiosity quickly crossed into something else. He kept asking questions, what I did for work, why I was in New York, exactly how long I'd be staying, even how much I'd paid for the Airbnb. I answered vaguely, not wanting to be rude. Still, an uneasiness began to build. One evening, I came back late from a meeting to find him waiting by my door, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Figured you'd be getting in around now," he said brightly. Thought you could use this." I took it, thanked him, and shut my door as soon as I could. The fact that he'd guessed my arrival time so accurately unsettled me. It felt like he'd been listening for me. That night, I double-locked the door and checked the window latch. The city noises outside, sirens, car horns, voices, felt amplified. I lay awake for hours thinking about Tom. The next morning, something else felt off. My laptop, which I always kept zipped in my bag, was sitting on the desk. I tried to tell myself I'd taken it out and forgotten, but the doubt lingered. I checked my bag, my wallet, my passport. Everything seemed in place, yet the idea that someone had been in my room wouldn't let go. Tom knocked later, but I stayed quiet and watched through the peephole until he finally walked away. That night, as I worked on my laptop, the Wi-Fi started dragging. When I checked the network, I saw an unfamiliar device connected. Tom's phone. My chest tightened. Why was he using my connection? The next day in the kitchen, I casually mentioned that the Wi-Fi had been acting up. Tom grinned. "Oh, I don't have my own internet," he said. "I sometimes borrow the neighbors if they don't mind." He said it like it was nothing. I laughed weakly, but on the inside I felt cornered. He was already invading small boundaries. What else was he willing to cross? Later that evening, I went out for dinner. When I returned, my door was slightly ajar. My heart hammered as I pushed it open. My bag lay on the bed, unzipped. Clothes and small items were scattered around. A quick check told me only one thing was missing: my watch. It wasn't expensive, but it had sentimental value. I marched to Tom's door and knocked. No answer. I stood there seething, unsure what to do. Call the police over a missing watch. Would they even come? That night, I dragged a chair against my door, sat with my back to it, and clutched a kitchen knife I'd taken from the shared drawer. Every footstep in the hallway made my pulse spike. In the morning, I stepped out to find Tom wandering the corridor like usual, all smiles. "Morning," he said cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. I forced a polite response, then shut myself back in my room and reopened the Airbnb listing. This time, I read every review carefully. A pattern emerged, one I'd missed before. Guests complained about a nosy neighbor who made them uncomfortable. Some mentioned missing belongings. No one named him outright, but it didn't take a genius to connect the dots. I messaged the host. They brushed off my concerns, suggesting I must have misplaced my watch, so I called the police. When the officers arrived, Tom played the part of the surprised, offended neighbor perfectly. He denied everything, but they searched his room anyway. They didn't just find my watch. They uncovered a stash: jewelry, electronics, even passports belonging to past guests. It was like a trophy pile. Tom's smile finally vanished as they snapped handcuffs on his wrists. As they led him away, he turned and looked at me, not friendly, not wounded, but cold and hateful. The police assured me I was safe now, but there was no way I was staying another night in that apartment. I packed my bags and checked into a cheap hotel. Lying awake in that unfamiliar room, I kept replaying every interaction, how he'd slowly gathered information about me, how easily I'd accepted his kindness. I couldn't stop wondering what might have happened if I'd ignored my instincts and stayed. When I got back to London, I told my story to friends and family. Some were horrified. Others gave me a wry smile and said, "Maybe stick to hotels next time." I laughed with them, but the experience left a permanent mark. If something feels wrong now, I listen. When I was a little girl, I went to a small church in our neighborhood. The building itself wasn't anything special, plain walls, worn pews, but something about it made me feel safe. The music, the low murmur of prayers, the sense of community. Sundays there felt peaceful. The pastor seemed kind back then. He had a gentle voice and a way of making people feel noticed. He spoke with passion about kindness and faith, and I admired him, the way many children admire adults in authority. Over time, though, something shifted. I couldn't explain it then, but I started feeling uneasy when he was around. He always seemed to notice me in particular. I was just a kid, but some of the moments we shared made me uncomfortable in ways I didn't have language for. One Sunday after service, My parents were outside chatting with friends while I waited near the back. The pastor approached me and asked if we could talk for a moment. He said it would be quick. A knot formed in my stomach, but I didn't know why. I was young. I trusted adults, so I agreed. He led me to a small room near the back of the church. It was cramped and dimly lit, nothing like the open, bright sanctuary. We sat down. He asked about school, if I was making friends, how my classes were going. I told him I had friends, that things were fine. For a few minutes, it felt like a normal conversation. Then the tone changed. He shifted closer. His questions and comments took on a strange familiarity. The air in that tiny room felt heavy. I began to feel trapped, like there wasn't enough space to breathe. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know how to stop it, so I stayed silent and waited for it to end. Eventually, he told me I could go. He acted as if nothing unusual had happened. I walked out, confused and unsettled. My parents were still outside. They noticed my expression and asked if everything was okay. I shrugged. How could I explain what I didn't understand myself? They seemed concerned but not alarmed. We went home. Life went on. In the weeks that followed, church never felt the same. I kept going, but the pastor's presence made my skin crawl. He stopped talking to me directly, yet I always felt watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had brushed up against me, even if I couldn't see it clearly. Years passed. In middle school, during a health class, we learned about personal boundaries and sexual harassment. As the teacher spoke, memories of that small room came flooding back. The way he'd moved closer, the way I'd felt trapped, wrong, ashamed for no reason I could name. For the first time, I understood what had happened. It hadn't been simple awkwardness or a misunderstanding. It had been inappropriate. I didn't sleep much that night. I knew I had to tell my parents. It took me a while to gather the courage. One evening, I sat them down and told them everything. What the pastor had done, how I'd felt, how I'd carried that confusion and discomfort for years. They were stunned, angry, hurt, sad. My father asked why I hadn't told them sooner. I told him the truth. I hadn't understood it myself at the time. I was just a child without the words to describe what I'd gone through. They held me, apologized for not seeing the signs, and told me it wasn't my fault. A few days later, we went to see the landlord who owned the church building. I told him my story, terrified he wouldn't believe me. He listened, really listened, and he believed me. The relief I felt in that moment was overwhelming. About a week later, we received an email from him. The pastor had been evicted. He was no longer allowed to work there. We felt a complicated mix of emotions: relief that he was gone, anger at what he'd done, sorrow for whoever else might have been hurt. I never went back to that church. I couldn't. The thought of walking through those doors again made my chest tighten. To this day, I still wonder if there were others. Children like me who walked into that small, dim room and walked out changed, without knowing why.